Good morning. Today we have two very special guests. We're talking about spirituality at the end of life, but spirituality in healthcare in general and how important that is. So we have two very special guests, MacKrell and Marci Pounders. They are both with Hope Healthcare here in Dallas. It's a wonderful organization. I've had their medical director as a guest, and you all just do such a great job in the community. And so we're just going to talk about spiritual support today. Tell me, Marci, what is the difference between emotional support? We all know what emotional support is. But what is spiritual support? What does that mean?
Well, I think spiritual support goes so much deeper. We are all kind of familiar with, I'm going to be with you and pat you on the back and make sure everything is okay. I'm going to kind of be your cheerleader and make you feel better. Spiritual support, you can be a cheerleader, but it tends to be more of what we call a ministry of presence, where we are with the person. They may not believe in any sort of a God or not have a spiritual life, but that doesn't really matter because, I can convey my own empathy to the other person. And I believe that that is the Holy Spirit moving from one person to another, even if they don't recognize that. Mm-hmm. So to me, spiritual support goes a lot deeper than other types of support because we have the backing of our own beliefs, and that gives us strength to help the other person.
Well, I know as a nurse, my faith is so important to me, and I use my faith every day. I mean, just to see some of the things you see, Mike, life is a journey, and that spiritual support is so vital in that journey. So, Marci, I know you've been a chaplain for how long? Tell me about your walk.
Well, I became a hospital chaplain back in 2006. I was at Baylor University Medical Center downtown, and my area of concentration was palliative care. And then later, when a hospice unit was added, I was the chaplain liaison for that unit. So my whole journey of chaplaincy has been shepherding people through the end of their lives. And a lot of my friends are, how do you do that work? It's awful. That's so depressing. But it's not. It's very fulfilling. And it's when you see someone transition from a great amount of fear of the unknown of what's happening, and you walk them through that process and they get to a place of peace, that is just marvelous. It's just remarkable. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's God entering into that relationship.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then Mike, I know you're a chaplain. Tell me about your walk up until this point and what you've been doing as a chaplain.
Sure. So I think I started in pastoral ministry when I was 19 years old. And God bless that church that took the chance to have this young guy who knew nothing to help them along in their spiritual journey. So part of that has been getting the correct education, a couple master's degrees, and then military chaplaincy has been my background as well. I'm currently in the Texas Army National Guard as a family life chaplain. And so I would say from like a young adult till now, I've been in ministry in some capacity, but mostly caring for people in those very vulnerable times where they're hurting and have questions. And we're talking about spirituality, and everybody has a place inside them from which they derive meaning. Mm-hmm. And so we try to feel around the rim of their soul and help them explore that, especially at the end of life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we talked about this yesterday when we met. There's this song, there's a God-shaped hole in all of us, and I love that song, and it's so true. We all need that spiritual support, and we all walk through a spiritual journey as well. So some issues I found, I was doing some research last night about our interview today. some spiritual issues that I read about: loss of faith, difficulty forgiving others, feeling abandoned by God. I've heard a lot of that with patients, not only hospice patients, but just we take care of all kinds of patients. And a lot of people have something that's happened in their life, traumatic, and they feel that they were abandoned. It's not fair. Anger towards God, guilt or shame, grief and loss, and then difficulty merging values with life experience. So I thought those were so interesting. So let me ask you guys, so how does exploring spirituality and faith impact or help people at the end of their life?
Well, I think Marci would concur that there's just a lot of things that come to the surface when someone's contemplating their finiteness, that my life is ending. And if they're of the mind, and if they're agreeable to have conversations, we're kind of the safe person that enters into their life, because we have, in a sense, nothing to gain. We're there purely for support. And in that vulnerable time, we can be that caring person that just listens. And in that listening, there is a exploration themselves of some of those things. And then they ask us questions, and then we're able to guide them along. It's quite exciting to be able to meet people at that point of their life.
And seeing that closure. So Marci, share a story for me, just the audience, something where you found how spiritual support was such a blessing to a family.
Well, I had one patient who was dying of, I believe it was liver failure. And they were getting ready to send her home on hospice. And the doctors called me because she was crying and sobbing, and they tried to explore it, but they couldn't get past her. She just wasn't opening up to them. So they called me and they said, can you go in and just see maybe you can explore something with her that we haven't been able to see. And so I went into the room, and she was in the room, in the bed, just sobbing. And her husband was sitting next to the bed, and he was crying too. And I came in, and she said, I've had some bad news. And I said, yes, I'm so sorry. Tell me what these tears are about. I mean, I know obviously that there's fear and there's all kinds of emotions swirling around in you right now, but tell me, there's something deeper, so tell me about that. And she explained to me that her husband was a good man, and he was going to go to heaven. And she was a sinner and miserable, and she was going to go to hell, and that's what she had spent most of her life fearing, was a separation from her husband in the afterlife.
Wow.
And she said, we'll be separated for all eternity, and I'll never see him again. And to me, this is terrible. This is the worst thing I can imagine. I've spent 30 years worrying about this. 30 years is a long time to be in that deep of a spiritual pain. And so we talked, and the conversation, as I tried to kind of channel it, was, do you want to be forgiven? What does reconciliation look like for you? She's like, well, I'm a sinner, and God could never forgive me. And I'm like, why not? Do you not believe that God loves you as his precious child? And that seemed to trigger something in her where she went, oh, I never thought of that. I said, if you want to be forgiven, let's pray for reconciliation. And that way you two will, a God who is worthy of worship will forgive you anything if you truly want to be forgiven. And so we prayed together, and she stopped crying. And the next day I went to see her before her discharge, and she was smiling. She was laughing with her husband. And I brought her a prayer shawl, and I said, we're going to wrap God's love around you so that you can feel it when you go home. And she was like a changed woman. And it was just because she never believed herself worthy. And that's something that a chaplain can truly help you with, is let's explore those feelings of self-worth. Let's explore those, the guilt and the fear of what you may have been experiencing in your life. I don't know what she did. She probably didn't do anything. But there are people out there who carry these deep, deep wounds. And we're equipped to be able to get in there and see what's in that God-shaped hole that you were referring to.
Yeah, and a lot of times when people are angry, you know, it's more than just they're angry that the coffee pot lid isn't on. You know, there's something deeper, and you all there's something about that ministerial chaplain that people can open up to you guys, where they may not be comfortable even opening up to a nurse or a social worker. So, Mike, I know you serve veterans, and tell us about what you do with veterans and how you've made a difference.
Sure. So I can piggyback on the story that Marci just told, because both her and I have just last week met with a veteran who had been feeling, I guess, somewhat guilty about not being there for his family in these last days, and wanting to, again, for many of these veterans who are facing the end of life, this is like their final battle. And so in our presence and in our conversations, we were able to help this veteran get to a place of being at peace with his service to God and country. And he needed validated from another veteran to say, job well done. You have served the course, you have kept the faith. And he was looking forward to the bright tomorrow that he has because of his faith. And so he needed validation from us that it's okay to let go now. Your battle has been fought. You have done well. And a lot of them have that need to say it's okay to let go, right? A lot of soldiers come back from periods of war with a hypervigilance where they, right, are still in the battle very much.
That fight or flight.
Yeah, the fight or flight.
Right.
And they have most soldiers, airmen, Navy, sailors, they carry these secret wounds that are inside. And they need at least a validating voice, an encouraging voice to be able to say, it's okay to talk about those. And we've had veterans tell stories that they've kept under wraps for 50, 60 years. And it's just exciting to see them kind of finally unearth that and bring that to the front and be able to have for themselves a sense of rightness, reconciliation about that experience.
Well, and you know, just being able to talk about something so traumatic. And I did find on the internet too, when I was doing my research, that 15% of veterans suffer from PTSD. And, you know, that's a lot of people that need to talk and, you know, need to be able to share. I know my father-in-law graduated from West Point and served 2 tours in Vietnam, and he has never been able to share the experiences that he saw, experiences he witnessed. He won't talk about it. He won't even talk about it to his wife.
Sure.
They're such painful memories. So what can, you know, just talking about vets, I have such a heart for seniors. We do our pajama drive. And, you know, I know that these veterans that are in nursing homes get very few visitors from the outside. They don't, you know, they're kind of forgotten, and we don't.
So what do we do?
What do we do?
So I think the crying need of everybody's soul is to connect with somebody. To be recognized, to be acknowledged. And I see veterans in facilities, and I think it's great that we provide certificates and blankets and coins, but they really need presence. They need someone to sit down non-anxiously, without judgment, and just hear them and be present with them. It's amazing what happens when soldiers are validated for their experience with not just a thank you for your service, but someone actually coming alongside them and wanting to hear about their entire life. Because, like myself, after 4 deployments, you get a kind of collective thought about your experience, and you wonder at times, maybe in darker times, if it really mattered. Because as a chaplain, we're a non-combatant. We don't carry a weapon, right? We're there to support the troops, to support the heroes. And we often wonder if our service has been recognized or if it's been valuable when we see these military campaigns successively go on forever in Afghanistan and Iraq and these other places. So I think what they need are the same cries of what everybody needs. They need a soul connection to be validated for being a human being. And I think that's the privilege Marci and I get, is to be by them in that, where we're actually paid to provide that service, and we enjoy doing it.
Well, and we, with our patients and clients, we call them, but I like to, especially our older clients, veteran or not, I always like to ask them what's their favorite movie, what's their favorite song. And it's amazing what music can just open up a conversation.
Yes.
So somebody that wants to have a spiritual conversation, how do they start? Just with someone, say it's a client or a roommate at a facility, or what's a good way to start a conversation?
So I follow an acrostic that spells the word loves, and it stands for listen, observe, validate, empathize, support.
Oh, I love that.
And I've been kind of following that. I know it sounds basic and rudimentary, but first is just creating the connection. Hey, how are you? And being genuine. All right, so you listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. I can't imagine what that would be like if that
we had
was
2, I
reversed.
know.
We'd be
There's a
speaking out of
reason.
both sides of our head, right? So I think listening is not just with ears, it's with your entire body. So I think we're present in a way that creates an unhurried space where they can, at their, at their pace, be able to share as they feel comfortable. And then we observe. We notice things about people, right? And as a nurse, you know that. You look at skin, you look at body.
Yeah, and when somebody's being really ugly, and just angry, and there's a root to something.
Yes.
There's something else going on,
Yes.
and how can we get there and talk about it? And well, we've got a clip. There is a website. It's a nonprofit called MakeTheConnection.net, and we're going to show a little 3-minute clip on veterans that have had that spiritual support and talking about spiritual support. So let's just take a watch.
The sniper just popped up out of this little hole, and he fired, and opened fire. And I remember saying, God, make it stop. And it didn't stop. A couple guys got wounded. And I marked that as the day I gave up the God of my childhood, because that God just didn't make sense. So for 10 years, I didn't have that support system, because there was no church where I felt welcome or felt I could belong.
When I joined the military, I was very religious. I felt God gave up on me. One day, after a really bad day, I literally cursed God, man. And it was something that I was brought up not to do.
I was raised in a parochial school system, and I went on to a Jesuit college, Jesuit training. After Vietnam, there was a period there of a number of years that I didn't do anything.
As I was drinking up, I was not going to church. That was the last thing on my mind. My mom would take my boys to church. But, of course, I wasn't into it. I was raised in church, but I just kind of lingered away from it.
That was one of the things that I lost over in Vietnam. I lost my faith in God. Couldn't understand how He could allow some of the things that I saw.
Spirituality is a very delicate subject when depression and mental illness or whatever, mental health, because there's that stigma that, well, you have God, you shouldn't have depression. But I was always talking to my pastor. I've always had a spiritual authority that I submitted to, and he encouraged me. He says, no, that's not the case. You take medicine for cholesterol. Mental illness is a disease that you can help. Don't feel guilty. You don't feel guilty for diabetes. You don't feel guilty for getting the flu. Let's treat this.
That's when I started branching out, talking to teachers in church and finding out, hey, there's vets in church here. And one of them's a licensed counselor, very good at it. And he sat down and we talk, and he offers suggestions and pointers.
I started going back to church. I talked with the bishop of my church, and we started working through a few things, and he suggested I go see somebody. He was a psychiatrist that went to the same church I did. He was very understanding. He helped bring some religious end of it, which brought me some healing, I felt.
Once I got my head clear on that, many, many years ago, I got back into my faith and very, very active in my faith.
I started reading the daily word every day, and that strengthened me. And the more I was in church, the better I felt.
I turned to my church, and they helped me with my faith and my belief to also not take things into my own hand and to begin to change myself for the better.
There's people out there that want to help you. There's excellent programs. Try to find a faith-based organization, whatever your faith may be, and begin to find yourself again, but get the help that's needed. It's there for you.
Developing a sense of trust and a sense of faith in the universe, in a higher power, in God, and whatever word works for whoever you are. I'm not religious in a sense that a lot of people would recognize, but I think that my spirituality was absolutely crucial to my recovery.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing. So what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that, just watching that?
So we talked about the topic of PTSD, right? And years ago, they used to call it different names. In World War II, they used to call it combat shell shock or combat stress, right? People go through difficulties in life, and they feel this confusion inside about, why do I feel sideways about this experience? And so you don't have to be in the military to experience that kind of trauma or stress. But coming alongside somebody and validating their pain, saying, you're right, there is pain, but through faith, revealing your feeling is really the beginning of healing. And when they hear that, there can be like an opening, like a shaft of light into their mind and heart to say, really? And then they have somebody coming alongside of them to help them through that journey, to unearth and just speak it. And so part of that gives, and tell me, Marci, if you feel that's true, part of that just gives them validation to say, okay, I'm a part of this human experience.
Yeah, I know my dad was in World War II. He was in 5 major invasions, D-Day, Tinian, Saipan, Okinawa, and Iwo Jima. And he was a country boy from a small country town in Kentucky who had never been exposed to any of those kind of horrors. And I think he went through much the same thing that when we heard the people on the video go through that, I'm sure that there was a period of time where he lost his faith. He was very traumatized. He went through many of the same things that we hear veterans going through, the nightmares and night terrors and alcoholism and anger issues and suicidal thoughts and all of that. And later on, I think it was maybe 60 years later, that he was able to talk to his shipmate buddies, and he then found a peace that he had not had for his whole life. And that, he would go to church, but then as he approached the end of his life, he seemed to find much more comfort in spiritual things and thinking about the afterlife that he had never thought about before. So I totally agree. The whole ministry of presence, the listening. I think chaplains, if you're a good chaplain, I think a good chaplain has to be an empath to some point. You have to be able to read people and sense things that they're not saying, because often it's the silence. It's in the silence where you can really interpret a great deal of meaning.
22 veterans, it's said, 22 veterans die every day because of suicide.
Wow.
So there is a tremendous need to catalyze caring people, veteran and non-veteran, to enter into their lives to say, you can make it, and there is help, and I care. So we're 2 of those people.
That's awesome. Our time has gone by so fast, and it's such a bummer because we could talk forever. And I'm going to definitely have you all back. But how can someone, if they're watching this and just want more information, say they're not hospice appropriate, but they are really needing some spiritual support, how could they get in touch with you all and find out, say they want to start a group, just a community group, in their neighborhood, just fellow veterans, and how would they get in touch with you?
Sure. Several ways. One, they can call our office in Garland, 972-278-0905.
And that's Hope Healthcare.
Hope Healthcare in Garland. We also have an office in Greenville and Hunt County. they can get on our website, hopehealthcareus.com, and follow the links and send us an inquiry of what they are interested in, and we'll get right back to them.
That's great. This has been so wonderful, and thank you so much. And we loved this conversation today, and thank you for all that you do in the community. It's very, very appreciated.
Thank you
Have
so
a good
much.
Friday.
Appreciate it.